Uh, should we get started? Should we get started and they can just join us in progress? Oh, okay, Erin can't see. Okay, well, I think we'll get started and then they can join us. So I'm very pleased to introduce Tom Wilcox of Ansonia Wines. Ansonia is a father and son business headquartered in Newton. They specialize in finding small French winemakers with interesting wines and developing strong relationships with them. These winemakers are often family businesses like Ansonia and generally have little or no American distribution. Ansonia came to be about 20 years ago. In 1998, Tom's father, Mark, who had been practicing law in Philadelphia for 20 years, took his family on a sabbatical to Burgundy. They brought back a large collection of wine for themselves as well as for friends and family. As the friends and family's supplies dwindled over the next year, Mark was often asked about the next importation, and thus the business was born. Tom and Mark still specialize in Burgundies, but also import wines from Alsace, the Rhone, the Languedoc, Loire, and Bordeaux. Their customers include restaurants in Boston, Philadelphia, and Washington, as well as private enthusiasts and collectors. Finally, while we would all prefer to be attending this event in person, the good news with the Zoom wine tasting is that no one has to drive home. So, as they say at Mardi Gras, laissez le bon temps rouler. Tom?
Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And yeah, you covered our background really nicely. We're small and we're used to doing these in person, but we're adapting and we're getting used to doing them a little bit more, a little bit more on the fly and with little differences. But the wine tastes the same, and it's actually easier to present information about it. So we'll take advantage of what we can get. I wanted to note just first of all that we'll be doing a one-way broadcast. I'll be sharing my screen, and we do this just so it's easier to manage the different attendees. But I really do hope that you guys will all use the chat and the Q&A functions in Zoom to interact and ask questions, and this should be really informal. So there won't be a Q&A period at the end. If you think of a question, just shout it out, and I'll either answer it or I'll make up something if I don't know the answer. So it looks like we've got everybody here, and see if there are any other housekeeping issues. Yeah, if you want to try putting in a test chat, just to make sure that it's working, you can change the to in the chat to all panelists and attendees, so then it's a chat among everybody on the call. Everybody can see it at the same time. Oops. Let's see. So I'm going to share my screen here. And all right, here we go. So as Rosemary said, we're a very small organization. It's just my father and me, and my father you'll see popping up in a couple of these photos. He handles most of the importing, and I do the retailing side. And we represent about 50 different winemakers around France, half in Burgundy and then half scattered around other regions in France. And if you have any trouble hearing me or any kind of if there are any technical issues, just chat use the Q&A function or the chat function. We can see if we can help you out. So we'll be doing 2 whites and 3 reds, as you figured out. Both of the whites are from Burgundy today. And really, to understand French wines, you kind of have to understand French geography, because really every region in France, every winemaking region is kind of like its own country. It has its own rules, its own traditions, its own grapes, its own way of making wines. The styles are different. And so to understand where the wine's coming from is really helpful in understanding the way the wine tastes. And again, I should say these all, you guys can pour these all into your glasses. Now the reds will open up nicely in the glass if they haven't already. And then the whites, we'll tackle the whites first. So the first wine comes from Chablis. Chablis is where this number 1 is right here on the map. It's part of Burgundy, and it is the northernmost part of Burgundy. It's kind of a satellite region of Burgundy, not part of the Côte d'Or, which is the more famous part of Burgundy. The grapes here are 100% Chardonnay, as they are in almost all of Burgundy for whites. And this producer is Jean Collet, who's a young, the name is Jean Collet, the winemaker is Romain Collet, who's a young guy who's just taken over, I think about 3 or 4 years ago from his father, who took over from his father. I think he's the 5th generation now making the wine. But Romain has really transformed the domaine into something a little bit more modern, a little bit more kind of technologically savvy. They've upgraded their equipment and their domain, and they've really made improvements that, they've kind of caught the eye of the international wine press now. And so it's really kind of paying off all this stuff that he's invested time and money into modernizing. Chablis is known for being very stony. Both the terroir, the landscape, and the wines themselves have a kind of a stony character. And so I think you can kind of see that in this. Traditionally, Chablis is Chardonnay that's raised in no oak or very, very little oak. This one's raised in no oak at all. So really what you get here is pure Chardonnay fruit that is kind of, it's about the fruit, but it's also about the stones and the tension and the energy that comes from the terroir, which is this very, very limestone heavy terroir. It used to be the bed of an ocean millions of years ago. And so there are actually lots of fossils that you can just find right lying on top of the vineyards. And so it's very, very limestone heavy soils. You can see, this is Romain here. He makes a bunch of different wines, and as you kind of go up in the price scale and up in the fanciness, the classifications of his wines, they do age them in oak. So we're tasting Grand Cru here in this picture, so they're coming from those small oak barrels that are traditional in Burgundy. But this wine, which is a village level from old vines, is raised in just stainless steel. So you see there's nice Chardonnay fruit. It's not a kind of a New World Chardonnay that you'd find is a little, butterier and kind of spicier. It's more about lemon fruit, a little bit of spice, some kind of oyster shells or some kind of savory marine kind of marine notes. Maybe oyster shells, maybe salt air, salt spray, something like that. In the mouth, you can see it has nice tension. It has nice acidity that keeps it, lively. But it also has a fair amount of width to it, of depth to it. And part of that is from the old vines. These are from 50-year-old vines. And as vines age, they get, their yield goes down. So they produce way fewer grapes, but the concentration of the fruit goes up. And usually people consider the quality of the fruit to go up too. So you get a lot less product from older vines, but you get better product. And so winemakers are always trying to decide when to pull up vines and trade off, the amount of quantity that they're getting for the quality. But you can see these are it's not hard to see where the stoniness in Chablis comes from. If you just walk out into a vineyard, the stones are everywhere, and they come right through in the wine. And when you get, particularly for me, that this is the style of Chablis that I most appreciate, because it's Chablis stripped down with no oak, and he doesn't do any lees stirring or any kind of things to dress it up with anything else. This is just Chablis in its pure form, and you're really getting the depth of it that comes from the vines and the fruit that they're producing. And again, if anybody has any questions, please just chat them into the chat. The other thing about this is that it's 2018, which is a very, very warm year in France. There were a lot of very warm years recently in France, but when the summers are very hot, the grapes end up with a fair amount of sugar at the end. When they get ripe by the harvest time, they have a lot of sugar, and that converts into more alcohol. And so these wines, while they're still Burgundy, so they're still under 14%, end up with more kind of viscosity and more mouthfeel than you often find in Chablis from, say, 20 years ago. All right, so that's wine number one. We'll move to wine number two, but I encourage you to go back and forth between the two of them because it's a good comparison between the two of them. Wine number two is also Chardonnay, and it's also from Burgundy, but it's also unoaked, so it's raised just in stainless steel as with the Chablis, but it couldn't be more different, I think you'll see, in terms of the expression that it's giving. So wine number two is from the Mâconnais. This map here on the right shows Burgundy that is everything of all of Burgundy except Chablis. Chablis would be off maybe, 6 inches off the top of your screen. Most of the famous Burgundies come from between Dijon and Chagny here, which is the Côte d'Or. But there are two, I would say, undervalued regions in Burgundy that are not as famous and certainly don't produce the same complexity of wine that you find in the Côte d'Or, but really produce excellent values. And that's the Côte Chalonnaise here, which we'll revisit with wine number 3, and the Mâconnais here, which we have with wine number 2. The Côte Chalonnaise is around the city of Chalon-sur-Saône, and the Mâconnais is around Mâcon. So you can see an entirely different fruit profile here, much more floral, much more kind of exotic fruits, round, almost honey, kind of herbal honey. This winemaker is also a different style too. This is my father on the left. He'll be the guy that pops up in a lot of these photos. Nicolas Maillet is the guy on the right, who's the winemaker. And this is standing in his vineyard, in the Mâcon Verzé vineyard that makes this wine that you're tasting. And you can see actually with the soil, I think this picture, yeah, you can see with these pictures, the soil is very different. It's much more clay in the soil. It's much richer. And this is classically what you find in the Mâconnais and in the Côte d'Or. Is a lot more clay. There's certainly limestone. You can see the little limestone pebbles in there, but it's nothing like Chablis where it's just kind of limestone right up on the top covering the surface. Maillet is a very interesting guy. He's completely, he's very dedicated to his own style of winemaking, I guess is one way to put it. He has, you know, a way that he wants to make his wine, and if it's really only, it's for him first more than anything else. He doesn't try to please anybody else, and he doesn't necessarily follow a lot of rules. He's gone completely biodynamic and organic, so it's a very low intervention style winemaker, and he kind of lets the wine make itself. He you know, follows each vintage. If a vintage is a warm vintage, the wines end up being warm. If it's a cold vintage, the wines are a little bit thinner and more, you know, with more tension in them. So he really doesn't try to steer his wines into anything. He follows what the vineyard gives him. With this wine, actually, in particular, the 2017 from Mâcon Verzé, he ended up with what's usually called a stuck fermentation. So fermentation takes a couple weeks to a couple months usually, but usually more like a couple weeks for all of the yeasts to consume all of the sugars after the harvest, and the grapes are pressed. You go into the tanks, the yeast eat the sugars and turn the sugars into alcohol. And with dry wines, like all of these, they convert all of the sugar into alcohol. So you end up with little or almost no sugar at the end. With this particular vintage, for whatever reason, after the fermentation started, it just kind of slowed and was progressing, you know, very, very slowly, and hadn't quite finished, but the sugar levels were just dropping very, very slowly, and the alcohol was rising very, very slowly. And his wine consultant, is kind of, you know, chemist wine consultant, said, you have to do something with this. You have to, you know, try to save this tank, this cuvee. You're going to lose it. You know, you can heat it up. If you heat it up, it encourages the yeast to you know, be more active and to eat the sugars, or you can add chemical enzymes that, you know, encourage the yeast along. And he said, nope, that's not how I work. We're going to do this. The wine's going to be ready when it's going to be ready. And the fermentation took 10 months to complete, which is, you know, almost unheard of. And at the end, you know, he was right. The yeast finished their fermentation and ended up with a wine that's as dry as any of his other wines, but it just kind of made its way there on its own. You can see in the mouth too, there's a lot more richness. We're changing vintages here too, so you see a little bit of the Mâcon Verzé wine number 2 is a little bit. It has another year of bottle age, and as wines get older, they soften a little bit. The acidity goes down, so you'll see that there's a little bit less acidity than there was in the Chablis. But you can see really the fruit profile just couldn't be more different between the two of them. We have a question: what makes Chardonnay buttery? It's a good question. It depends on where it's from. I would say for me, at least texture-wise, if not flavor-wise, the second one is more buttery than the first one. But Chardonnay as a grape just produces an amount of viscosity and texture that is naturally buttery, or gives it kind of a buttery mouth coating feeling. And so really Chardonnay, even at Chablis, where you end up with, you know, very piercing, dry, not soft, rich wines, you still end up with Chardonnay that gives you a, you know, just like a roundness that people often call butteriness. when you get into newer world styles, you end up with usually people traditionally use more oak or more new oak in the new world, and so you end up with more people that associate that butteriness with kind of the butter popcorn part of butteriness with Chardonnay, and that ends up being so the butteriness comes from the grape, but also from how a lot of people make the grape. Okay, so I've got a poll for you guys to vote. Oops, on your favorite. I think I have to stop sharing my screen. Yeah, let's see here. Okay. So just a quick poll. You can vote. Which of the two did you prefer? And then I'll share the results. And there are no wrong answers. And if you're on an iPad or a phone, I apologize, it's a little hard to find the voting, although it looks like almost everybody's doing it now. So. All right, I'll give you another few seconds. Okay, so I'll end the poll and share the results. So it looks like Chambly won, but we had votes for both of them, 5-3. And great. So if you have any other questions for whites, don't hesitate to put them into the chat. But I will move on to the reds now. I think I can do this here. Yeah, okay, here we go. So go back to the screen share. Okay, so the three reds we'll be tasting. The first one is a traditional red Burgundy. The second one is kind of a less traditional red Burgundy, and I'll explain why when we get to that. And then the third one is from the Southern Rhone, so it was nowhere near Burgundy. Wine number 3 is from, so we're back on this map. Mâcon, where wine number 2 was, is down here. So we've actually moved north about, I don't know, 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes, up to the Côte Chalonnaise, to Givry. And Givry is a town, like a lot of the Côte Chalonnaise, where 20 years ago, a lot of the wine coming out of there was very rustic, very kind of humble Burgundy that didn't have a lot of depth to it. You know, nothing wrong with it. Inexpensive, kind of bistro style Pinot Noir, which, particularly given the prices that you get when you go about 20 minutes further north from that, was a nice break. Givry and the Côte Chalonnaise still has a very good price to quality ratio, but the wines have gotten a lot better there, and that's partially because there's more demand for the wines. People are able to get a little higher prices, and they're able to invest a little bit more in the facilities and the making of the wine. But it's also, frankly, because summers have been getting a lot hotter, and the warm summers have produced wines that are a little richer and kind of give a little bit more body to the wines where they once maybe were lacking. This is what the soil looks like in Givry. So again, you can see it's more clay, much more clay and much more marl than you find in Chablis. Oops, here. The winemaker for this is a young guy named Gauthier Desvignes. He took over from his father. His grandfather started the vineyard, and so his father and his grandfather kind of worked in the old regime of Givry, where, you know, they weren't really trying to produce age-worthy wines or wines that had a lot of character. Just, you know, simple, hearty wines, a little bit rough around the edges, but with you know, plenty of tannin, plenty of fruit. Not wines you want to keep around or serve to your best guests. But Gauthier has taken over and has really added a lot to the production. He did internships, what they're called stages, in France, around the world, in New Zealand and in California, and then he worked in Wyoming for a while. But he's got a lot of entrepreneurial spirit, and really, you know, sees the potential that his family's terroir can be. He thinks it can be a lot better than the wines that they've been producing. So he's been changing how they work the fields. He's been changing how they make the wine in the cellar, and the results are really impressive. He's been getting a lot of good notes, and we've seen the wines really improve over the last, you know, 5 or 6 years. He took over, I think, 6 years ago in the winemaking, and then his first full vintage was 3 years ago, where he did the winemaking and the vineyard work. So again, 100% Pinot Noir, which is the rule in Burgundy, except for the Beaujolais, where they make Gamay, which will be the next wine that we try. So you can see there's still this kind of, you know, they're not rustic, but they're kind of hearty Givry tannins. But there's a lot more elegance to this wine than there would have been, you know, from wine like this 20 years ago. The fruit, because this is 2018 again, which is a really hot year, the fruit has really added a lot of depth to it. It's young, nice fruit. The tannins are there, but they're not, you know, aggressive. This is a young wine, but not a wine that needs years and years or hours and hours to open up. It's a nice classic Pinot Noir fruit from Burgundy, which is usually strawberries and cherries and maybe cassis if you get into the northern part, but also that nice earthiness and a nice minerality that keeps it fresh. Gauthier for this wine uses very little new oak. He ages, you can see these barrels here, he ages all of his wines in oak, which most people do in Burgundy, or I think everyone does in Burgundy. But with the village wine, which is the entry level wine, which is what this one is, he doesn't use any new oak. So as you use barrels of oak every year, they impart a little less oak flavor, and they just kind of they help the wine. It's called micro-oxygenation. So the pores in the wood let a little bit of oxygen through, and they help the wine breathe as it's aging, and it develops the wine a little bit so it doesn't taste quite as young and aggressive when you bottle it. So with this wine, he uses very little or no new oak, meaning barrels that are brand new that give you a lot of toast oak flavor, but he uses everything else is in old barrels that you can, that you use to just give it a little bit more development. All right, here's Gauthier. So I'm gonna move on to wine number 4, unless anybody has questions for 3. So 4 is from Juliana, which is in the Beaujolais. And the Beaujolais is interesting. If you ask people in the Beaujolais, they would tell you that they're part of Burgundy. If you ask people in Burgundy, they would tell you that the Beaujolais is not part of Burgundy, or is maybe a JV part of Burgundy. Beaujolais is a little bit of a chip on its shoulder because of that, but they really, the spirit of the Beaujolais is, kind of joie de vivre and easiness, and wines that don't take themselves too seriously. So I don't think they would really mind the slight from the rest of Burgundy. The grape here is Gamay. And Gamay landed in the Beaujolais in 1395 when the Duke of Burgundy, Philip something or other, I think it's Philip the Bold, one of the Philips, who was a Duke of Burgundy, decided that he didn't like Gamay and he banished it from Burgundy. I guess you could do that when you were the Duke of Burgundy. And so he moved, he said, you can't grow Gamay anymore in Burgundy. And so it all fled to the south to the Beaujolais. Beaujolais is a visually charming region, just north of Lyon, which you see at the bottom of this. Lyon is the second biggest city in France after Paris. And it's south of Mâcon, which would be up at the top here. So back to this map, it's just off the bottom of this map here. Beaujolais is beautiful, and they grow Gamay vines, and you can see the Gamay vines look a little different from Pinot Noir. They grow right out of the ground, and they're called goblet trained. So they don't really they don't need the wires that Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir is a much less hardy vine in terms of the plant itself. So you don't need with Gamay, the vines just come right out of the soil, and they don't need things to be. With Pinot Noir, unless you have it on a wire, it gets blown over and the branches break in the summer when the shoots are coming out. Gamay is much hardier, so it just grows out of the grass out of the ground they're called goblet vines or goblet trained vines. Question about the Givry. Would I consider the Givry young? Yes, I would. And actually, as you go up, a lot of de Vigne's other wines, he has a couple different Premier Crus, will age for 5, even 10 years with no problem. I don't have all the data on that just because he's kind of recently remade his style. But this one, I would say, the 2018, it's nice now. It's kind of a hardiness now. I think it would easily go another 5-6 years, as it would as it goes that far, the tannins would recede, the acid would recede, and the fruit would kind of mellow, and you get the nice secondary things that happen to Burgundy when they get old, earthiness, kind of forest leaves and floor and mushrooms and things like that. But absolutely, I think it has the concentration and the tannic structure that you could definitely age it for a couple of years. You know, at some point, it's a matter of taste. I think if you like, a lot of people like to drink wines young, and in fact, we have a number of winemakers that we work with where it's a couple, and the wife likes to drink the wines at a certain age, either young or old, and the husband drinks them the opposite, even their own wines. Particularly in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, we found that you can, you know, with Châteauneuf-du-Pape, you can drink it young or you can drink it old, and there's kind of a gap in the middle. And we have a couple people we work with where the husband and wife just have different preferences, and so they try to match them up, and they're drinking their different wines, and they, you know, the people that drink them early try not to drink all of it, so the people that like to drink it late still have some to drink when it gets late. So with the Gamay, you can see the color is different. If you're in the light, it's a more purple color from the grapes. The producer here is Laurent Perrichon, who's been around for 125 years, 100, maybe 150 years. They have some very, very old vines. Among them, the ones in this vine, I think this is, yeah, these vines here that you see in this picture are for this one is not. But these are quite old. You can see they've got these long stalks coming out of the ground. They're 80-year-old vines that produce the Julienat Clos des Cher. And in Beaujolais, there are 10 specific crus, they're called, that are different towns that produce much more kind of what I would call much more interesting Beaujolais. Beaujolais is a bad rap partially because of the Beaujolais Nouveau, which is a wine that, you know, there's nothing wrong with Beaujolais Nouveau, but it's rushed to market, I would say, right after the harvest. So the Beaujolais Nouveau 2020, like the grapes that were on the vines 2 months ago, will be coming out right before Thanksgiving this fall. And, you know, as I said, there's nothing wrong with Beaujolais Nouveau. I think it kind of sells what Gamay and what Beaujolais can do a little short, in that if you age it a little more and you let the vines get older, and you age it in a little bit of oak. These guys use actually large oak barrels, which impart a little less oak flavor, but give it a little bit more breathing room. Gamay, and particularly Julienat, I think, can produce really excellent wines that rival the wines from the Pinot Noir wines from further north in Burgundy. So again, nothing wrong with the Beaujolais Nouveau. I think the only thing is that people, because it's the most publicized of the Beaujolais, people associate it with being the only way to drink Beaujolais, and there's a world of Beaujolais that is better and not that much more expensive per bottle. You can see there's much more structure in this than in the Pinot Noir. And actually, I encourage you to go back and forth between the two of them. There's just a little bit more rusticity. Pinot Noir has a little bit of elegance that the Beaujolais doesn't have. Beaujolais, I think it was Jancis Robinson, who's a wine writer, said, she said, Beaujolais is meant to be drunk and not contemplated, which is a good way to put it. It's, you know, it's wine that's nice picnic wine for I actually think it's perfect Thanksgiving wine. It's what I serve for Thanksgiving at my house. It's wine that, you know, you don't need to age it forever. You don't need to have the perfect glass and the perfect food. It's wine that's, you know, about jovial spirit of the harvest and spirit of just, you know, the pleasure of winemaking. And you can see really, I mean, you can't because you don't have the other wines next to it, but the concentration that comes from these 80-year-old vines really gives the Gamay, if you have it in younger vines, it's much more kind of high toned. The fruit is a little redder, and it's less, there's just not the same concentration and depth that you find in wines like this, where the yields are so low on vines that are that old, but the quality ends up being, you know, really high because all the nutrients get distributed over fewer bunches of grapes. So you're really kind of concentrating and distilling all of that nutrient into a smaller number, and you end up with a more intense wine. This wine in particular ages beautifully. Aging Beaujolais is not something that most people do or that you have to do, but because this has old vines, because they give it a little bit of oak, and they extract it a fair amount, this wine, we've had this maybe 10 years out of harvest, or 12 years out of harvest. They've opened bottles for us that are just beautiful and not at all tired, and have a lot of energy and a lot of fruit and nice balance between them. So not all Beaujolais you can age, but some you can. All right, so I'm going to move to, also, I mean, most of these places I would recommend visiting, but if you are in the area, Beaujolais is just charming. It's just a beautiful, beautiful rolling hills and very friendly. You know, everyone has a tasting room. Everyone has a place you can just walk into. Burgundy is, because it's the rest of Burgundy, because of the demand and because it's pretty, you know, it's world famous and a little more well trodden than Beaujolais, has a little bit of a stuffier atmosphere. You can't just walk into a winery and ask to taste. But in Beaujolais, you almost certainly can with anybody. They're welcoming and bring out some charcuterie and some cheese. And I highly recommend, once everyone's allowed to visit places anymore, I recommend the Beaujolais. Okay, so now we're going to go to wine number 5, and we're going to change gears entirely. So this is a Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And Châteauneuf-du-Pape is in the southern Rhone Valley, and it's the most famous town in the southern Rhone. There's actually a lot of other wine made in the southern Rhone. The southern Rhone, you can see, is down here. This is the Mediterranean at the bottom, so we're really not very far from the southern coast of France. This is Marseille. Avignon is right here, which is the biggest city in the southern Rhone Valley. And Châteauneuf-du-Pape is about 20 minutes north of Avignon. There are a lot of really lovely wines that are made in Gigondas, Baccarat, Baume de Venise, Rasteau, etc., that are across the valley here. But Châteauneuf-du-Pape is the famous one for a reason. It produces remarkable wines that have a lot of depth, a lot of character. This is the first wine. Oh, before I forget, if you would, take out your phone and take a picture of your tasting setup wherever you are. We have people from different states around the country and different parts of the Boston area and the Cape. And so take a picture of where you are, and I'm going to chat my phone number. Oops, I'll chat my phone number in and text me a photo of where you are, and then I'll have Aaron compile them and we'll share them with you guys so we can see where we're not tasting in person together, but we'll have a little bit of a sharing of our locations and how our setup looks. So I'm going to text my phone number here into the chat. And if you're not looking at the chat, my phone number is 215-498-0189. You can also email any of these pictures that you get, but we always like seeing how people have set up their tasting. Okay, so back to Châteauneuf-du-Pape. It's a lovely, lovely town, lovely area. Again, anywhere in Provence it's hard to argue with visiting. But Châteauneuf-du-Pape is nice. It's kind of set up for visitors well, in that it has a lot of tasting rooms you can visit and places it's a good place for wine tourism. This is Christophe Mestre on the left. Again, my dad on the right. And he makes, he's kind of an old school style of making Châteauneuf-du-Pape. Old school in that it's the trend today is to make a lot of different cuvées, a lot of different, make an oaked cuvée or a cuvée from this place, or a just Syrah cuvée or a just Grenache. And his style is how everyone used to make Châteauneuf-du-Pape, which is one red cuvée and one white cuvée. And so he has, I think, 15 or 16 different plots all around Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and he blends them all into a single cuvée. And so his goal is to have his wine represent the appellation as a whole rather than a specific part of the appellation. The 2017, which is what you're drinking, it was a little unusual in that he, in 2017 in the spring, the flowering for the Grenache was very bad. I think they had a cold snap right after the Grenache flowered. And so the fruit set for the Grenache was very low. So a lot of people had had 60 or 70% less Grenache than they usually have. Grenache is one of the grapes in Chateauneuf-du-Pape, and I actually should say this is the first blend of grapes that we'll be tasting, that we tasted through the whole tasting. So the two whites were both Chardonnay. First red was Pinot 100%. Second red was Gamay 100%. And the third one is a blend of Syrah, Grenache, Mourvedre, Carignan, and then he has like 6 or 7 other grapes that he only has small plots of that he puts in. And that's the convention in Chateauneuf-du-Pape, is really you kind of have all of these different things and you blend them all into the same cuvee. So usually his cuvee is about 80% Grenache or 70% Grenache. This year it's only 30 because he had so little of it. So Syrah ends up being the star of this wine in a way that it's usually not. Usually it's only 5 or 10%, and this one is 30% to make up for the lack of Grenache. Syrah has a kind of a darker, little more peppery tone to it, and Grenache is a little bit kind of redder, more candied fruits. So you'll see this is a little bit kind of bluer fruits, darker, pepperier than you often find with his cuvee. Every house in Chateauneuf-du-Pape, however, has their own different blends. Some people are very, very high on Grenache. Some people are high on Syrah. Some people are high on Mourvedre, which is the third really common grape in the Southern Rhone. So it all depends on the compilation of the different plots that they have. But in this one, they really had to follow the year. And so in 2017, you see a lot of Chateauneuf-du-Papes that are a little bit atypical for the style of the house. So you can see in the nose, it's much kind of darker. There's more spice, like lavender and maybe thyme. There's more perfume than the other wines, I would say. Because it's further south, it'll be a little higher in alcohol, so there's more kind of texture to the wine in the mouth, and it kind of pops out of the glass a little faster. And there's lots of depth to it. Certainly more than the other two. Lots of yeah, still going. There's nice definition to it, actually. The tannins are there and you can see them, but they're kind of well covered with the fruit. So they're nicely, I would say it's nicely put together. It's a little darker and a little more Syrah heavy, a little spicier than you usually find with this cuvee. But again, Chateauneuf-du-Pape you can age for a very long time. Christophe makes his, a lot of times when you drink Chateauneuf-du-Pape and they're very, very young, it's not that they taste young or they taste aggressive, it's just that they don't really taste like what you paid for them. And so usually, to realize the potential of the wine, you have to give it a lot more time in Chateauneuf-du-Pape because people design their wines to be aged longer. With Mestre, he designs his wines to not be aged for super long. You can age them, but they're relatively accessible young. And so you can see there's definitely some tannin in this wine, and if you like younger wines with tannin, you could certainly drink this now, but you also could hold on to this for a bit. He uses almost no new oak too, which is a little unusual today in Chateauneuf-du-Pape. It used to be that everyone just used, they're huge, they're like 3 or 4 times the size of a regular Burgundy barrel, and they don't really impart any kind of oak flavor. It's just for that micro-oxygenation. But he has in recent years, a lot of people have moved towards oaking the wines just to make them add that kind of spice and that kind of a little bit of a little patina that you get from heavily oaking wines. He doesn't do that. He oaks just his Syrah a little bit before he blends it all together in some oak. Everything else he leaves out of oak. There's a question, what is the story behind the raised glass logo on the Chateauneuf-du-Pape bottles? You know what? I don't know. I bet there is a story behind that. I know I told you I would make up stories if I didn't know the answer, but I'm sure there is a story behind that. I don't quite know what it is. Chateauneuf-du-Pape is a really wonderful appellation, though. It's really interesting because it's enormous, actually, compared with most other appellations in France. It just produces a huge amount of wine, and it's one of the places, in Burgundy, what they're chasing is kind of the terroir, and so one producer will make a lot of different wines from a lot of different plots, And the idea with those wines is to express the place rather than the winemaker. In Bordeaux, that's kind of the case, although there's a little bit more. The plots that people own are much, much bigger. And so the style of the house comes through a little bit more. And in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, I think it's a nice blend of the two. So most people will have, you'll kind of taste the house style in a wine, but because there's only usually one or two cuvées that they make, the house style is partially due to the house and partially due to the small sector of Châteauneuf-du-Pape where the wine comes from. So for me, it's an interesting place because it's a good mix of the expression of the terroir and the expression of the winemaker. All right, so voting time for these three. Let's see. Stop. Whoops. That, and I'll stop sharing. Okay, and we'll do the poll. Okay, so preference for the three reds. They're very different, obviously, and there are no wrong answers. And then I've purposely not told you the price of any of these wines, so we'll do the last poll will be we'll do overall, and then we'll do the best value with the prices. You can decide. We find it's nice to do tasting without the prices because then you get to make a purely value decision based on just the value that you find in the glass rather than how much you thought you might have paid for it. And of course, price plays plays an important role in the quality of a wine and the value of the wine and what it's worth. But we find it's nice to taste blind of price and then look at the price later. Okay, so we've got almost everybody voted. In the poll, there's an overwhelming winner. We've got 2 votes for Givry and 6 for the Châteauneuf-du-Pape. I agree with you, actually. I think the Châteauneuf-du-Pape is drinking beautifully right now. All right, so stop sharing. Then we have 2 more polls. Okay, so favorite overall of the 5. A couple more seconds. We're almost through that. I've got. All right. So we've got a vote through the chat for Châteauneuf, so I'll add 1 to that. And share. So still favorites of the Châteauneuf, although we have some white drinkers that like the Chablis and the Macron, so that's good. Okay, and then I'll give you the prices, and you can make a value. Whoops. I seem not to have done this correctly. Nope, that one's not working. Well, hang on, I'll go back to this and I'll show you the prices, and then you can make your own personal decisions and you won't have to vote on them. All right. So here they are. Okay, so the Chablis is 29, the Macron is 28, the Vignes is 29, the Julienat is 24, and the Châteauneuf is 34. So there's $10 of difference between all of them. Well, great. That got us through all 5 of them, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, please chat them in, or if you think of any questions later, send me an email. I'll send Aaron my email, so you guys, I'll have that. But thank you. This was lots of fun, and I'm pleased that you guys all signed up and we're able to send you the wines. And someday, when everything calms down and everything's normal again, you'll have to come visit us in Newtonville. And we used to hold tastings there regularly. Every Saturday we're open. We used to be open from noon or from 10 to 4. We'd have lots of wines open to taste, and you could browse around the warehouse. We're not open during the week, essentially just an online store during the week. But we've had to stop the tastings on Saturdays. But when we resume, we'll have to come see us. But until then, we actually do a lot of these Zoom tastings. We're actually doing one tomorrow. but we open them to anyone, the public. You can sign up for them through the site, and we've been doing pickup only actually with the small bottles, and so the cost is a little less, and you get a little less of the bottle, but you don't have to open 5 bottles at the same time. And just wanted to say a quick thank you to Christine and David Root, who are, they're still here, for helping set this up. Those are longtime customers of mine who generously thought it would be fun to have me come to a tasting for you guys. And this was lots of fun. Yeah, and I put together if any of these wines spoke to you guys, there's a code, and I'll send this out in a link too. We're doing 15% off if you use the code Chilton at checkout for any of these 5 wines. And I've linked them all at insoniawines.com/Chilton. But yeah, come say hi to us in Newtonville someday when everything calms down. And but until that point, we're going to do a lot more Zoom tastings. We have 2 coming up in November. We do them they're a little bit. This we wanted to do kind of a broad, Tour de France kind of lineup, so to speak, for this one. So with the ones the ones we do for the store, they're a little bit narrower and deeper. So the first one in November is all Northern Rhone Reds, and then the second one is all Southern Rhone Reds. So we'll have a couple Chateauneuf hops like number 5. And then in December, we're doing a fancy one that's going to be all Premier Cru Burgundies, white and red. That'll be lots of fun. But in any event, thank you guys for joining on a Friday evening, and I hope you enjoyed it. And we will hope to see you guys soon.
Tom, thank you. That was terrific.